Boom.
All right. So welcome everyone. This is the publishing panel for the conference this weekend. And I'm Marianne Worthington. I'm going to facilitate the panel. And I want to thank Sue Spearman, who's here to run the technology. So we're going to have some questions to ask the panelists. And if you have questions that you would like for us to address, please put them in the Q&A. And I'll try to monitor those and we'll try to get to those. So don't be shy about asking questions. And we've also asked all of the participants to read a little bit from their own work. So it'll be a reading and speaking panel, and I hope that'll work out for everybody. So let me start by welcoming everyone and saying how glad I am to be part of this panel and by introducing all of the panelists. I'm going to do that all at once and get it out of the way. So first we have Marianne Chan, who grew up in Germany and Lansing, Michigan, and she earned the MFA from the University of Nevada. She has two books from Sarah Band, Leaving Biddle City, published this year, and her first book, All Heathens, which was published in 2020. All Heathens was the winner of the 2021 GLCA New Writers Award in Poetry, the 2021 Ohio Anna Book Award in Poetry, and the 2022 Association for Asian American Studies Book Award for Outstanding Achievement. Her poems have appeared in national magazines, and from 2019 to 2017 to 2019, she was poetry editor at Split Lip magazine. She lives in Norfolk and she teaches at Old Dominion University. So welcome, Marianne. And we also have Amelia Martins, who a lot of you will know because she's been an officer for KSPS. She also has a Sarah Band book from 2016 called The Spoons in the Grass Are There to Dig a Moat. And that book was selected for the 2014 Linda Bruckheimer series in Kentucky literature. She received her MFA from Indiana University and currently is working as a training facilitator who works with folks who experience multiple barriers to employment. She has 4 poetry chapbooks, and her recent poetry has appeared in Cream City Review, Still the Journal, Southern Indiana Review, and Sweet, a Literary Confection. Amelia says she's married to the poet Britton Shirley, and they have, quote, 2 smart, beautiful, brave daughters and a ridiculous dog. Oh, I think we all have those. Maybe not the daughter part, but the ridiculous dogs part. A lot of us have those. So welcome, Amelia. And also on our panel today is Dorian Hairston. Dorian is a Lexington, Kentucky native. He's an educator there. He's a poet and a former college athlete. His first collection of poems is called Pretend the Ball is Named Jim Crow. It's from the University Press of Kentucky and explores the life and legacy of Josh Gibson, the greatest catcher to play the game of baseball. And I would also like to say that the poems are not just about Josh Gibson, because it's a book of persona poems, so there are other people who speak in the book, and it's just such a beautiful book. And if you go back a couple of issues at Still the Journal, you can find an interview that we did with Dorian pretty close to when the book came out. Dorian is a member of the Appalachian Poets Collective, and his work has appeared in Anthology of Appalachian Writers and in Blackbone, 25 Years of the Appalachian Poets. He enjoys reading and writing poetry, but what he loves most is cooking for his family, playing some good music, and dancing often. We maybe won't ask you to dance, Dorian, but okay. Welcome. I'm glad to have you here. And Katerina Stokova, whose camera is not working, but she's here. And many of you know Katerina as well. She is the current director of the Kentucky Book Fair, so she has a big weekend coming up next week. She's the author of several award-winning poetry books and the senior editor of Accents Publishing, where she has selected, edited, and published close to 80 volumes of poetry. She hosts a radio show called Accents, and she has acted in the lead roles in the independent feature films Proud Citizen and Fort Maria, both directed by Tom Sutherland. She splits her time between the coast of the Black Sea and the rolling hills of Kentucky. She writes, lives, and thinks in two languages. And in 2024, she published a collection of poetry, Between a Birdcage and a Birdhouse, also from the University Press of Kentucky, and The Poet's Guide to Publishing from McFarland. So, welcome to you, Katerina. I remember when your press used to be in your dining room. That's how long we've known each other. Yeah. And finally, we have John Thrower, and John is also a familiar face to many of us, as he is also an officer in the Kentucky State Poetry Society. He has a long history in underground publishing, beginning with the ephemeral zine culture dating back to the late 1980s, with the zine No Watches, No Clocks, No Calendars. He traveled extensively around the U.S. and participated in zine making, publishing, and distribution activities from San Francisco to New York City. He's worked as an editor for small press publishing outlets, including Ligature, Prescription Strength Poetry, The Legendary, and Girls with Insurance. His editing spans the landscape from poetry to fiction to research to contemporary essays and critical theory. And in addition to his editorial role at Workhorse, where he focuses on their magazine, The Yearling, and on the Lexington Poetry Month, which happens every June, he's also the editor of Pegasus, which is the magazine for the Kentucky State Poetry Society. He's a writer, artist, musician, educator, and serious cook, currently doing the dishes in Lexington, Kentucky. Dorian, we didn't ask you if you also do the dishes after you cook, but if you two guys are for hire, you want to come cook and clean up after, that'd be great. So welcome everyone. I want to welcome you and say hello. And the first thing I wanted to do was ask each of you to give a little personal history of your experiences with publishing. And that could be anything. I think people are probably interested in hearing about your book journeys. So you might want to talk about those. And we'll just let everybody take a turn at that first question and see where that leads us. So I wonder, Amelia, if I could start with you.
Sure. So I feel really lucky in my chapbook and book publishing experience. I've had really good experiences. Let's see, I'm going to start, I guess, in the beginning. So Purgatory was my first chapbook, and it's prose poems, which is not surprising, I guess, because I write a lot of prose poems. But it came out with Black Lawrence Press, and this was way back. It won the 2010, I think, Black River chapbook competition. And it was the first thing that I had won. And I didn't really know anything about publishing, anything more than a single poem here or there at that point. So I was super excited about it. I worked with Diane Goddell at Black Lawrence Press, and she is amazing. If you're looking for a place to send work, Black Lawrence Press takes good care of their authors. The whole process was extremely kind and generous to somebody who is new to it. But the chapbook came out. It's beautiful. It's still selling. It's still being promoted by Black Lawrence Press, and that was 2010. So I guess it came out in 2012. So it's been a while, but that chapbook is still in existence and still being promoted. They've got a spooky, speculative, and cozy reading sale at Black Lawrence right now. So you can get this chapbook on sale, and it's still being supported by that press. And that was a really nice process because nothing really changed in terms of the poems, but I had an input on the cover. It was just a very gentle first experience. And then my second chapbook is Clatter, and it came out in 2013 from Floating Wolf Quarterly. It only exists online, which I was super excited about, to have something that was accessible in that way, that anybody could get it, anybody can read it. You don't have to have the the hard copy of it. But I'd never published an online chapbook, and I was like, I don't know what this is. Let me try it. And that one too, it was like a really nice process. I had again input on the cover, and it's those are like drunk Santa Claus poems. So Santa Claus has been exiled, and it's super fun to read. The holidays are coming up. If you need some drunk Santa Claus poems, you might look for that. But it's online, and it's like still there. And it was also just a really like gentle process. And then okay, so I'm also publishing all this stuff while my kids are really little. My first daughter was born in 2010, and so that lines up right with Purgatory getting accepted. So like my author picture for that, I am like giant. My whole face is giant, my body is giant. I'm like, this is my first author picture, and I'm just like hugely pregnant. Um, and then as the kids are little, I'm still publishing a lot of stuff. So in 2014, my third chapbook came out. So my kids are really little. And that one was a series of faults. And that was with Finishing Line Press. And that was a really different experience. That was the first time where I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't have as much control. They have a weird pre-sale model. Like the book is beautiful. I really like how it came out. My sister's art is on the cover, and like that's really special to me. But that process was different than the first two. Like there was less clear communication. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. I love how it turned out, and that was a really important chapbook for me because I had been sending out a full-length collection, and I had been sending it out and sending it out. Nothing was happening. And finally, I just cut it, and I cut it to the chapbook length that is a series of faults. And once I did that, like that was, I think, the first place that I had sent that version to, they took it. And I was like, oh, that might be what needed to happen. So even though that experience with Finishing Line wasn't great, I like the chapbook that got made. And what it did for me was like open the floodgates to let my book be my book, because I had published all those poems in the chapbook. So it really like freed up. And I didn't know that at the time, but it like freed up what was going to come right after that. So it was like the dam had broken, and those poems needed to be out there in that way. They didn't need to be part of a full-length collection. So that happened. And then right after that is when Theraband accepted The Spoons in the Grass Are There to Dig a Moat, which I had cut those other poems out of. And that was like my experience with Saraband is fantastic. I love them. This press, I would say Saraband and Black Lawrence like just take such good care of their authors. The whole process, working with Kristen Miller was amazing. My book is beautiful. Like I love what it looks like so much. It's like got a nice green like cover. They didn't give me a hard time about my super long title. They just took such care in the whole editing process. Um, and I felt very I don't know, very taken care of, I guess. And they did a great job promoting it. It got sent to a bunch of places. It was a really beautiful experience, and I could not ask for something better in a book experience. Although I don't have another one, so maybe I need to work on that. Um, and yeah, I felt like they did a good job in promotion. They did a good job in editing. Did a good job in communication, like the whole time. And it's nice to like still have a relationship with this press, even though my book came out in 2016. So like now it's been a while. Still have a really good relationship, and I really appreciate that. And then after that, I got Ursa Minor, which is super cute and tiny. And it like fits in your pocket. So those and still prose poems, but that was also a really good experience. That was with Elsewhere magazine. They're in Utah, and that chapbook has gone into 2 editions. So this is the cover for the second one. The first one is like just the title, and it's all black and white. And then they were like, "Ooh, we want to do something different." So I have a chapbook that has 2 very different covers, but also like really well supported and really good communication. So I just feel like overall I've been super lucky, and been really well taken care of by everybody that has been interested in publishing my work. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you, Amelia. We may come back to this idea about finishing line, because people have strong opinions about finishing line. I wanted to go to Marianne next, since you're also a Saraband author, and maybe you can, speak to Amelia's experiences by sharing your own, and we can hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to second everything that Amelia said about Black Lawrence Press, about Finishing Line Press, and then also Saraband. I mean, I haven't been published in Finishing Line or in Black Lawrence Press, but I've heard the same exact things. Like I have good friends who are published from Black Lawrence Press who just love their experience there. Also with Saraband, I feel the exact same way. When I published All Heathens and Leaving Biddle City, I felt so I mostly worked with Sarah Gorham for All Heathens, and because that book was published in 2020 before she retired. And I just felt really cared for, and I felt like they really believed in the book. And they also, I think that there were times when we disagreed, but I think that it was because her instincts were, sorry, my cat is kind of playing over here, but because her instincts were so smart about it, and I decided I wanted to just trust her because I knew that she understood the market and knew sort of how to kind of promote it and also what the cover should look like. Also in terms of promotion and publicity, I think Saraband has a really great publicist. Joanna Englert is the publicist there. And they just do such a great job of kind of like making sure that your book gets reviewed, making sure that people see it. And they have a really great network is what it seems. I want to talk a little bit about sort of like my process as well. And I want to say that I'm really glad that Amelia said that she's had really good experiences submitting, because when I was kind of putting my manuscript together for All Heathens, I felt, I was sort of at the stage where I had graduated with my MFA, and I had an MFA manuscript, and it was kind of a mess. Like it was all over the place because I was like in my MFA, I was doing all these exercises, trying new things. And so there wasn't a really unified voice, and it was kind of inconsistent across poems, and there wasn't really like a center to it. And I sent that book out a couple times and got rejected. And that was fine. I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep working, keep plugging away. And I wrote a lot of individual poems, and I sent those ones out to literary magazines. And I felt good about sending out to literary magazines. It felt like a lot more accessible to me than sending out a full manuscript. Like I felt like I wasn't ready yet. And I think that I have this kind of like, I don't know if other writers feel this way, but just like this perpetual state of like feeling unready, right? Like I'm a total imposter in this. I shouldn't be sending a book out. But I took a manuscript workshop, and I think it was 2017. And it was January 2017. I didn't have a manuscript really put together, but then that class kind of forced me to put one together. And I was in a class with some really great students. Paige Lewis, for example, whose book also came out from Saraband, was in that class. And then some other writers who've published multiple books since then. And I was just really inspired by everyone's writing in that class. And also, I, for some reason, felt like I saw sort of like the thread that was running through my own work and knew where to add things. And then I was the last to workshop, and at the end of the workshop was extremely positive. And then at the very end, my professor said, "I think you should send this to Saraband." And I think that if I hadn't had that community and had somebody say that to me, I would have waited for years to send it out. And so then I went ahead and sent it out, and a couple months later, it was accepted. And I've been really happy that I've been with Saraband this entire time, with both All Heathens and Leaving Biddle City. And so I think just my thesis statement there is that I think community really matters when sort of putting a manuscript together and also sending it out.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to remember that idea about community and see what others might want to say about that too. I think that's important. So, Katerina, let's move to you, and maybe you could talk about your own experiences with publishing your own work.
Yes, of course. I started writing at 8 years old, and I started trying to publish my poems as soon as I learned how to address an envelope. So when I was 8 or 9 years old, I started sending poems to newspapers and magazines that I knew. And then I actually published for very first time when I was 16. So it took a few years. So after that, I didn't write for a while, and my first book was published at 36. I was 36. That is a bilingual book called The Air Around the Butterfly, and it was published by a Bulgarian publisher in both languages. And I had to bring with suitcases, just as many books as I could and distribute them by myself. So basically, in very real sense, it acted, or I acted as if I have self-published my first book in the United States, or at least I was the only one who supported it. I guess that taught me a lot. That experience taught me a lot. I learned a lot. And in very short, basically months after my bilingual book came out, a chapbook came out from Finishing Line Press. So I had opinions, strong ones, about how this should be done, the publishing thing. So I decided to start my own press, but that's a different question and different conversation. But my goal since then has been to publish everything in 2 languages and in 2 countries, and to have my work translated and published in as many countries and languages as possible. The story of my latest poetry book was that I saw, here it is again, Black Lawrence Press have an announcement like, well, we're starting a new series by immigrant poets. And I happen to be one. And I wrote to Amelia and I say, Amelia, what was your experience? Do you recommend them? And she was very encouraging. And I sent my immigrants, no, and actually at that point I constructed my manuscript between a bird cage and a bird house. And I sent it to Black Lawrence Press and also to University Press of Kentucky, and University Press of Kentucky picked it up. So that is the story of my publishing, my latest poetry book. That said, I also have a nonfiction book, The Poet's Guide to Publishing, in which I try to put everything I know about putting a book together and how to publish it and how to promote it. I call it my soup to nuts book. And well, on the 21st, which is earlier this week, I guess, Monday, my first novella came out in Bulgarian in Bulgaria. So far, I might be able to translate it and publish it in English, but for now it's only in Bulgarian.
Yeah. Very interesting journey. Thank you, Katerina. And
Yeah.
I want to ask you some questions a little bit later about accents in particular.
Sure thing, yes.
Okay, thank you. And Dorian?
Yes. So my book journey. So I think my first poem that I ever published, I'll say it this way, I was in 8th grade. I was in Miss Berryman's, I was a GT kid. So there was like 7 of us and we had to read Gone with the Wind. And then there was this poem that we had to read afterwards, where the refrain was on the question of race. So the last line of it was I asked the question of my race, and I think very seriously. I boldly and proudly write down black, and she put that outside of her room on her door, and that was the first time I ever published a poem in Miss Berryman's class over at Southern Middle. And I didn't stop writing poetry after that. And I started Pretend the Ball is Named Jim Crow as a senior in high school because Frank X. Walker owed Phyllis Schlick a favor. And that favor was to come meet me the way that she tells the story. As an independent study, I was tasked with writing a book similar to Isaac Murphy, I Dedicate This Ride. And she wanted me to do it with baseball. So I started with Jackie Robinson, Happy Chandler, and Branch Rickey, who those three players are responsible for largely integrating Major League Baseball so that the World Series could look as diverse as it does today. I'm still a little upset about the Dodgers taking game one because I want the Yankees to win just because, well, we won't get into that. Anyway, I was not having much success with those poems. So I decided to switch it to Josh Gibson, who I discovered through the librarians at Tates Creek High School. And it took me 10 years to write this collection. And the way that it ended up at the University Press of Kentucky is that Patrick O'Dowd was actually the acquisitions editor for the University Press of Kentucky at the time. I was just finishing I think it was my MFA. And we had coffee at Common Grounds that no longer exist over off of Main Street or High Street in downtown Lexington. And he was interested in the collection because I'd been reading at Holler, which no longer a thing. But I'd been reading at Holler, and he'd heard me read from this collection, and I said, "Yeah, I'll be in touch." Decided to get married and have 2 kids, and put the book kind of on hold. I was always writing. And then Yvonne Johnson wrote I Am Woman published by Accents. And in Louisville, she asked me to introduce her, to open for her when she launched her book. And when she signed I Am Woman, she said, if you do not publish yours within the next year, we can no longer be friends. So we set up childcare for the summer. Grandparents came through, and I was able to finish the manuscript and send it over to Patrick. Say, hey, this is what I've got. Are you all still interested? And he said, absolutely. And that's the story of University Press of Kentucky Publishing. Pretend the Ball is named Jim Crow.
I guess it helps to get a threat from a dear friend that that nothing can light a fire under you like a threat of.
I love that friendship. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and Yvonne's book is absolutely fabulous too. So, all right, and finally, John, what about your own journey with publishing?
Oh boy. So, my life as a writer is quite separate from the way I conceive of my life as an editor or in publishing. So I'm going to deal with the publishing aspect, I guess. When I was very young, I got into zine culture through punk rock, so late 80s, and then dropped out of school, traveled around the country, and in that journey around the country, connected with so many different literary people through a musical context. So zine culture that was initially about music, but kind of under the surface level of that was really about the individual experience, even sociological topics. So like early versions of Comet Bus magazine kind of illustrate that transition from a music culture to a more sociological and or kind of narrative individual experience, all of which are published in a very DIY sort of way. And then after I realized I really hate hanging out with these punk rock people, I decided I needed to go to school to eat food. So I was lucky because I went to college at Southeast Missouri State University, and my mentor, who was new to the university, um, wanted to start a university press. So there was no real university press there. There was kind of the derelict shell of things that had existed in the 50s and 60s, but they were largely defunct. So this is Dr. Susan Swartout. She started this press, and we got along great. Like I said, she was my mentor. I'm still an undergrad at this point, but there were opportunities to do that work. And when she found out about my history, it interested her, and I was willing to do it. And so that kind of was cool because I got to see the experience, not just of the making of the book, but like the literal work of the publishing house, dealing with printers, dealing with designers, doing some design ourselves. And then through that whole thread, connecting with individual poets at the school and in the area. So in that kind of Southeast Missouri, Southern Illinois, Western Kentucky, Northwestern Tennessee, and creating chapbooks on the side was always a part of that. And then after graduation, and I earned an MA, not an MFA, so I was a trained teacher. So I went right into teaching, and then connected with a variety of different places, kind of depending on where I was in the country and who I was reading or listening to talk about publishing, working with individual publishers. Eventually, I connected with Univocal Publishing, which published French critical theory in English translations. So I was essentially like a translations editor, making sure the translations, sounded, I don't want to say good because it's critical theory and it's notoriously like not always good writing, but at least was digestible in English. And that they were eventually purchased by the University of Minnesota Press. And then after that, I moved to Kentucky, and I just kind of looked around and connected with the right people. So working with KSPS has been great. Publishing Pegasus has been great. But Marianne mentioned the idea of community, and thinking back, that has been the through line of all of my work. I would much rather publish someone than publish myself. I have a complicated relationship with the poet side of me and the musician side of me as well. It's almost a private kind of action. But to build community and to make others happy, it really drives me.
John, one of the things that you mentioned that I want to sort of pivot to Katerina was learning the job of publishing while you're on the job. And I mentioned earlier, Katerina, that I first met you when your press was in your dining room, and you literally had a machine in your dining room where you were making chapbooks, poetry chapbooks. So is that also how you got into publishing, Katerina? You just started your press and learned as you went along?
Yes. Yes. We first had a vision, my business partner and I, who was my husband at the time, and now he's still my business partner and co-owner of Accents Publishing. And we had a vision that we wanted to create the $5 chapbook, the $5 handmade chapbook. And we wanted to learn everything there is to learn about publishing. We didn't compromise, but we learn to do, our job as publishers better and better with every book. We used better paper, we used better better cover stock. So yeah, we did learn, and for us it was important to have a high margin as well, so that we can reinvest any profits into the back into the business, so to say, so that we can purchase equipment. We started with actually a little $100 machine that is like a toaster, and it's a machine that melts glue, and then you bind books that way. And then after publishing 3 or 4 little chapbooks, and they were sold by $5, and our goal was the cost of materials to be 25 cents, up to no more than 25 cents. And when we did a contest after our first chapbook contest, we were able to buy a binding machine from China and a cutting machine from China, which Marianne saw. It was in our living room, and we were able to publish like dozen more books until at some point it was unmanageable. All I was doing was printing and matching papers with cover stock and figuring out how much ink is left, and just all sorts of details that took space in my head.
Thank you for that. It's a good memory I have of the beginnings of business. But several of you mentioned what a good relationship you've had with your editors. And so I wanted to go to Marianne, since you've had experience at Split Lip as an editor. What are some things that you as an editor can do to bring that sense of caring and community to the writers that you work with?
I love that. That's such a great question. When I worked at Split Lip, we published 1 poem per month per genre, and I think they're still doing the same thing. And each of the submissions, for each submission, a poet would just submit 1 poem. And I think that what we did, and I think what we were all of the editors at that time were really proud of, was that we would do a lot to promote the work of our writers. And at the very beginning, we weren't paying. So towards the end, we were paying like $50 per poem. But before that, it was all volunteers, and then we weren't paying contributors. And so what we wanted to give in return was, we're going to share your poem everywhere. We're going to share it all the time. If you have any successes, we're going to share that as well. And so that was one way that we made sure that we were kind of caring for our contributors. And another way was just if there was a poem that we wanted to publish, and maybe its ending wasn't quite right, or maybe there was just a couple lines that could be tweaked slightly, making those suggestions, but then also making them in respectful ways, and also just being kind of aware that the artist might not want to make those changes, and kind of trying and navigating that. And so those were just a couple ways that we made sure that we were properly caring for our contributors.
That's a really interesting point about making sure that writers understand that most editing are suggestions. They're suggestions, and the writer has the right to say, "No, I don't want to do that," or maybe we could compromise and do something else. Yeah. So, and before time has kind of gotten away from me, but because we also promised a reading, why don't we do that now, and then we'll see how much time we have left, and whether we can get to some more questions. So, Dorian, would you mind to go first with the reading?
I do not mind. So this poem that I'm going to read is one that I don't read often. And it comes from a collection, which in the Bible's named Jim Crow. And it references the time that Josh Gibson, who's Hall of Fame baseball player, credited with hitting the most home runs in in baseball history, We've integrated the record books now, so he is now the all-time batting average leader, unseating Ty Cobb as the leader, which is so pleasant for any baseball fans out there. But this is a reference to his time down in the Dominican Republic, because during the Great Depression, Rafael Leonidas Trujillo would actually pay Negro League baseball players better than they could get paid up in the United States. And this is titled Perejil. Persona Josh Gibson. Trujillo done rolled out the red carpet for Negro Leaguers' first chance he get, which is something Roosevelt ain't never do or done before. He let us wear his name, a big Trujillo, cross our chest and pay us good money, fine liquor, fair weather, and more beautiful skirts than we can count. I never been one to speak that Dominican type Spanish, but seem Trujillo and his money don't really mind. And seeing how Negro contracts don't get no gate, an opportunity to walk out to leave behind that white mess them Americans worship so much is like a psychic playing numbers. Rumor been that Gus don't like paying his players, but I ain't never had no problems with that. Only reason I took a trip down south is because Trujillo got them big bucks, sugar and rum type money, and baseball race free down there. But ain't that some type of nonsense? Trujillo, like in Negroes, more than Roosevelt. And one or do we have, how are we doing on time? Just one?
Or you can read another. Yeah, absolutely.
I'll read the in the interest of time, I'll read the first poem in the collection. And this is it's a World Series poem, which means it is written in couplets and it's in 9 innings. And this is Josh Gibson's manifesto for Black baseball players. Never forget the 42 reasons baseball is best played with color. 2, steal bases like they stole this country. 3, break into record books, turn more than just they ink black. 4, pretend the ball is named Jim Crow. 5, decolonize the Hall of Fame. 6, remember we gave the game lights, helmets, and style. 7, never be controlled by anything white. 8, belt lift every voice and sing during their national anthem. And 9, find you a Helen, drop down on one knee, place a baseball field on her 4th finger. And I wanted to read that one because when Josh Gibson broke the record for batting average, one of my friends texted me, break into record books, turn more than just the ink black, and put quotes around it, because that's exactly what he did.
Exactly. I learned so much, Dorian, from reading your book. And I do love the voice of Josh, but I love Hook's Tinker as well in that book, because he sees the big picture, the great big picture, the whole cultural sports picture. So thank you for that, Dorian.
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you. Amelia, let's hear from you.
Okay. I just want to say, I think, Dorian, I heard you read at Teen Howl at the Carnegie Center in like 2016, maybe. And I was like, these poems are like,
That's where I got this book. That's why I went and grabbed it off my shelf.
I have been waiting for your book for years and just love those poems when I heard them. And I love your book so much. I've given it to everybody. I'm like, you need this. It's so good. Thank you for reading those poems. Okay, I'm gonna read one poem from Ursa Minor. And let's see. So just as we talk about publishing, like one weird thing is if you write prose poems, I'm very attached to what the size is of my prose poems. Like it still matters to me what they look like. And so every once in a while, like it'll turn out how I wanted it. And every once in a while it'll be like, it's not the right size box. And it's visually still important to me. So I don't know, that's something to think about. This is called The Little Girl and the Bear Work a Puzzle of the Earth. And the north wind with her trumpet and star-strewn hair is their favorite. Then the pod of blue whales wrapped along the western shoreline. The little girl assures the bear, someday, the parent people will come back. The bear does not care and thinks only of the ice floe and how cold seems like it would be silent. But he believes it's more like static, a hum, electric, that occasionally cracks fantastic. Now the little girl is working on a double-decker bus, the red pieces like berries in her fingers. She can't get the bus to fit back on the continent. The continent. Everything is coming apart, but this is only one way to look at it. The little girl likes the idea of burying the cardboard pieces in the yard, so everything can return, uncolonized, layers of paper and fabricated inks, washing back year after year into the sediment, into the marrow of buried bones. So that chapbook is all Little Girl and the Bear poems, which are actually just both my kids. But one of them has to be the bear.
Right.
I'm gonna read one more poem, and this one is not published. I have been having a hard time in the last year. I changed jobs and I like stopped doing a lot of things that I was doing, and so I'm just now getting back to where like I can hear and I'm listening again. So I'm gonna read a new poem that is not published on a panel about publishing. Maybe somebody likes it. And it's not a prose poem, which is kind of cool for me. So this is called As Glaciers Melt, Bodies Come Out of the Ice. I am trying to not say anything, since I can't say something nice. Our daughter says she wishes the bullet flew a millimeter to the other side. And I say, don't say that out loud, as we drive to the university for her week of nerd camp. She rides shotgun, a transitional person. Headphones ring her neck, conceding to talk to me instead of scrolling. I say, some thoughts are best kept internal. She says, the landscape here looks just the same as home, but closer to the road. There are bodies of deer twisted and dried in the sun. We are going over the speed limit, she says. I am driving through the multiverse, and the topography is rolling hills, trees in full summer green that hide everything, including the soon-to-be bodies along the road, white-lined. I am listening, and one side of my head is fully engaged in replaying the original Manchurian Candidate. Meanwhile, we enter a roundabout, the campus map too small to read, and bodies rising from the frosty deep.
Thank you, Amelia. I always love how your family shows up in your poetry.
You do.
Yeah, they do. Thank you so much. So, John, could we hear from you next?
Sure. So I'm just going to read a couple that are sort of newer to me. The first one that I'll read is called The Last Fermata in 21. The service was at the Veterans Cemetery in Poplar. His brothers were, as ever, theatrical in their mourning. Tony sobbing noticeably, verbally, cinematically. His children at arm's length, uncomfortably morose and bored. Tyke hugging Tim tighter than I have seen humans hug anything but life preservers. Tyler weeping onto the shoulder of a woman he did not know, her blouse fading uncomfortably to a darker black. The artillery of thunder, rain making shrapnel on the concrete drive and the roof. Rain, pattering handgun fire on umbrellas held by those who did not fit in the small chapel. Our house was 6 hours away and you were racing, but the dead, despite all evidence to the contrary, don't like to wait. And so it started without you. Veterans lined the room and stood around in the rain outside, waiting on something personal that had already arrived. The seated crowd Mostly civilians who had never been to war listened to short, too kind speeches whispered almost inaudibly by men gone sensitive for once in their cold lives. Many men I knew who had said things so vile that were it not for the dead man at the front of the room and my mother sitting next to me would have caused me to stand in the rain, waiting on you, who had not yet arrived. The first notes of taps startled most of us. The plaintive bugle softened by the weather. Tony moaned the first fermata. I turned and saw the uniformed old bugler draped in black neoprene, backdrop of clouds over a cemetery as if they belonged together. The guns startled all of us. And then the last one I'll read is just a sort of old unity poem disguised as a nature poem. So to single seem a creature greater. Benton Park's mallards kill, engines in unison, razor sharp arrow point under cloud sky. They perfectly in air show sequence and at unknown click shift west, their aft alight with mites of a biology same. When they stall on the quilted altitude, time stops, shudder still. Then bang, they bank north in a chorus, bank again over Crittenden Street in concert and glide, anthem pluribus and unum equivocal, each duck a meager muscle, paltry bone, selflessly assembled so to single seem a creature greater, as they, descending toward Cherokee Street, yaw, one all, in wet memory, an eloquent synchrony sudden, aim east again, and climb.
Thank you so much, John. I love the title of that first poem. I think the fermata was the first musical symbol I learned what that means. Yeah. I love how you reference it in the poem. Katerina, how about you?
Yes, of course. I'll read to you one poem from Between a Birdcage and a Birdhouse. And it has several words in a different language, not Bulgarian, but in a different language that I happen to have studied quite a bit of. And the words never really have an explanation within the body of the poem. But here's the poem with a long title. To the foreign woman who called her daughter Skutina for untying her shoes in the post office, Beaumont Branch, Lexington, Kentucky, April 18th, 2013. Somebody always listens. Somebody always understands, sees, feels what you say. I wouldn't want to be her, your little girl with pink sneakers staring numbly into the floor. I wouldn't want to be you, a beacon of bile, arms crossed over the chest that helped you emigrate. Life appears to not be what he promised. The beauty you traded in for comfort half vanished, the comfort itself now taken for granted. Nor your meek American husband resigned to this upgrade to loneliness 1.1, your strange meals, barbed glances, loaded silences, submitted to living in fear of having a different opinion. Neither the elderly female relative with her back to all of us pretending to be engrossed in the merchandise of padded envelopes and comical postcards. The girl walks up to her and looks at cats with large eyes, dancing groundhogs, thank you notes for the fact that nobody here speaks foreign languages. Little girl, before it gets better, I'm sorry to say, it will get worse. If I could, I would tell her, Apomnites, but she scares me too. For what is worth, one day she will want to erase what she just said and instead kneel down to help and continue to teach you, for she will know nothing matters more than her only daughter being able to walk well. Until then, it's okay to cry for the losses and accept the love. Любимая is what your mother should have said to you. I would tell her that I know. I know. I would tell her, I'm so sorry. I know. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. That's a very powerful poem. And I appreciate you reading it today. So, Marianne, could you end our reading part of the panel?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you all so much. These readings have been so great to listen to. So I'm just going to read one poem from my book, Leaving Biddle City, and it's the title poem. And I love how much Amelia has talked about writing prose poems. I also, for this book, wrote prose poems. And for this one, I wanted it to be a kind of prose sonnet. So it actually, and I just made sure, I was like, it's 14 lines. It's still 14 lines. Okay, Leaving Biddle City. Outside the quality dairy, pink-haired humans in their 20s sip on gallons of apple cider vinegar. This is where the sky is gray and the streets are gray, and the message inside us to escape the cold remains unread. I want to discard this punchki. I want to crack open the sky into a frying pan and eat it with bacon for lunch. Once I saw a barn on fire in an empty field, filling the gray sky with more gray, smoke and ash, but also orange, the blaze and heat stinging my cheeks and lungs. No animal was harmed. The horses with their worn-out hooves galloped across the state of Michigan to Canada, gorging on cherries, chomping on boxes of Jiffy corn muffin mix, their need to escape belting the high notes from their chests. Biddle City, I'll call you my brief and little home, but the crab apples soured on my lover's lawn, and I am tired of the colorless winters, the only occasional fire that made me feel like I was somewhere, someone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. And that's the title poem from your collection, is that correct? Yes. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. Let me start with Kathleen Gregg's question. And this is a question for editors. Is it difficult to keep your personal style or subject matter preferences out of the process of accepting or rejecting a manuscript or, or a poem that you might be looking at for a lit mag? Is it difficult to keep your personal style? So, John, I saw you sort of snicker there. Do you want to answer
Yeah,
first?
I love that question. The answer is yes, no. So recently with Pegasus, I recruited some people to become editors with me, and I didn't want to boss those people around. So like Lucy Jays and Susanna Spearman are also editors of Pegasus. There's not a hierarchy, like I'm not over them, but it was a pleasure to like go through the submissions the first time because I got to explain the things that piss me off about poetry, and they're all like so trite, and I sound like such a jerk when I tell them like I really don't want another horse poem. I don't like mama as a name for a woman. No more barns, please. Things like that, right? That are trite, but you come across them, and I recognize how trite they are. And so we kind of argued a little bit, and we have a ma poem this issue. So I'm not going to die on those hills. They are just my personal taste. But what really matters is it a good poem? Like, does it sing to us? That is the thing that matters down at its core. So, you know, I'm not a basketball fan, but a good poem is a good poem, even if it's about basketball.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where I stand. On the surface, though, no more horse poems for me.
Right. So, Marianne, in your work as editor, what did you do to keep your personal biases out of the accepting or rejecting process?
I think that so it's hard to do that. I think that it's the same thing that I do as a teacher. I want, as a teacher, I want to encourage my students to kind of to have access to their own voice, to be able to share their own voice and present their own styles to me, and not feel like I'm going to want them to write in a sort of way, in a certain way, type of or to have a certain kind of aesthetic, or to only write about certain types of topics, because I had actually experienced that before in MFA workshops that I'd taken in the past. And so that was something that I definitely didn't want to bring to my editing, and also to my work as a teacher. And so I think I tried to read the poem for what it's trying to do. And if it's not kind of, if it's not, if it doesn't feel like it has a heart, if it doesn't feel like it has a center, if it doesn't feel like there is unity in the poem, then I might make edits for changes to kind of make it so that it has that. But then if it really feels like there's not enough of that there, then I will just reject it and kind of maybe make suggestions for future poems, right? And so yeah, that's sort of where I stand on that.
Okay. Thank you. I know that as an editor myself, I have different levels of rejection letters, that can speak to what you've just said. Yeah. And so this last question, and I think we have time to answer it. We're just a little bit over time, but the next session doesn't start till 4:15. And it has to do with something Amelia mentioned earlier, and that is, and I wondered if Dorian could maybe start with this question. What do you do if your manuscript is not going anywhere? I mean, you mentioned it took you 10 years to put your manuscript together, and part of that was just life getting in the way. But Amelia also talked about how she divided her manuscript into chapbooks, and that worked for her. So, Dorian, what about when you were in that 10-year place where you were trying to finish your book? What are some things that you tried to do to
Well,
help?
since mine's persona, yeah, the one of the things I did was I tried to start adding other voices when I felt like, because there were certainly times where I felt stuck as I was working on this collection, and for example, there were for a long time there were no women voices in the text. And I was like, okay, how do I include these women in Josh's life inside of this collection? And I had that took a lot of work, but that was one of the things that I did to try to switch it up and figure out a way to make this feel more complete, more whole. There are certainly some things that I had to take out too, because they weren't working. They need to be somewhere else. And actually, as I was trying to figure out what I was going to read today, there were some poems that I had not seen in like 4 or 5 years, that were originally in the collection, but they didn't make sense. And that's another thing that I kind of, so the short answer is try to figure out a way to add and listen to the poems and see what's missing and see if you can fill those gaps. And then also, if it belongs in another book, let it belong in another collection, and that's
Yeah.
totally fine.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to do. You work so hard on a poem, it's hard, it hurts a little to take them out of your manuscript. But and also another suggestion might be to work on poetic sequences like Amelia mentioned with the poems in Ursa Minor. And so Amelia, this last question is for you. Um, John LaPearl says, I love your poetry and your reading today. Appreciate your perspective on publishing. My question is about manuscript classes. Do you have a suggestion for these classes? I'm a high school English teacher, so I don't actually have time to take a lengthy class, but would love suggestions for maybe weekend summer manuscript workshops. I wonder what your thoughts are on the paid manuscript consultants that Black Lawrence offers.
So, I'm biased because for years I was one of those consultants. I love doing that type of work. I love looking at people's books or chapbooks and just um, being able to maybe see the thing that they can't see because it's been so close. And that, like, I just did a consultation with a woman who I worked with her on a different book several years ago through Black Lawrence, and she had something new, and she was like, "Hey, I would like you to take a look at it again." And that makes me feel so good that somebody wants to come back. So I've started doing consultations on my own, and I love that work so much because when I was doing it with Black Lawrence, I had a very specific time frame, and I would get a lot to do at once, and there's not really big parts of my life where I have a lot of time now. So I'm doing it just individually, and it fits much better because I can, work it into my life. But I think that's very valuable. I've had a lot of feedback, just speaking from the consultations I've done of people getting books or chapbooks accepted afterwards. And it's just maybe, like Dorian said, something was missing. Maybe there was a voice or a thread that was missing or not fully developed that you don't notice. Or maybe it's like very small tweaks in terms of order. Like there's some things that, like, sometimes reading a collection, I'm like, ooh, if I had known this, if I had read this poem through the lens of having these 3 poems earlier, it would have made a world of difference into how I'm understanding this perspective or this experience. So like order is really important. And sometimes even in my own work, it's really hard to get the order right. So I think they're very valuable. You've got to find somebody that can see your work and has what Marianne was talking about being able to read your work with the idea of your voice and not their, like, not that editor wants to lay on top of it, but can you see the poems for what they are, or what they're trying to be, or what they could be, and not like take over it. So I think you've got to find the right person. Black Lawrence has a pretty robust program, and I haven't looked at it in maybe a year, but I think they still do it where you could send in like a packet of poems and then like a chapbook. Like I think they have multiple levels, so you could just get a taste of, like, does this person work well for me? Let me send them 10 poems and see if the feedback I get is valuable before you like invest too much of your money in somebody. But I think those things are really valuable. I appreciate it deeply when I have people look at my own work. One of the benefits is that I am married to a poet who writes very differently than me. I want him to stop using the word "the," and he won't stop using it. It's fine. But he writes very differently. He has a totally different process than I have. And just having like an in-house poet is super helpful because I'm like, okay, here's this. But for anybody else who's trying to put something together, sometimes we're just too close to it. Sometimes you need somebody else. So like the community that Marianne was talking about, like I'm so jealous of that. And it's something that I hope to get back into, like, but I just right now I'm so fragmented in what's happening in like the kid's life and a new job and all these things that, like, I've lost that community. But I think if you can find a community of people who like know your work and know what your work is trying to do, that can be really valuable because sometimes you just don't, you just can't see it.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to, and some of you may also want to tag on to that, but I wanted to ask Katerina one more question, and this will be our last question. But Katerina, if there's 1 or 2 things that you look for when you're reading manuscripts that have been submitted to either your contest or like for publication at Accents, when you're reading book manuscripts, what's 1 or 2 things that you look for that you know, well, this can be an Accents book?
I am looking for not only the manuscript, but the author also. I'm looking for the whole package. You want to work with this person, you want to know that you could get along. That's one other thing uh, other thing that makes a good author is that person having a large network. You know that this person will stand behind their book. It is especially satisfying if it's a first-time author, and if the manuscript is in line with the mission and vision of the press. If the author is a famous author, that doesn't hurt because it's a prestige publication. If the author is not a first-time author, but the person hasn't published in a while, that is a plus. And the most important, of course, is that I really, really like the manuscript. And the way that I know it is that I'm normally very busy. And if with everything that I'm doing, if I sit down and I start reading and I cannot stop until the end, that means I want to publish this book. So no matter how many books I've already accepted or what else I have on my plate, I would take that book. So it's kind of it.
Okay, thank you. And one more chance for any of you to chime in on anything that we've talked about today. Editing, publishing.
I just real quick want to say that, like, just remember it's just people. Like, it's just people reading your work. So when I send something out, I really have to remind myself it is just a person who is making a choice about this, how they feel on that day, what else they've already selected for the magazine. Like, try not to take it personally if it doesn't get accepted, because I have been a judge. I have been an editor with Exit 7 for about 10 years. Like, sometimes it is either it's not a good fit for that moment, or you already have two poems that are about that thing, or it's just that the order that you read them in and how you were feeling and the fact that you were hungry. Like, I didn't make a good choice about this poem. So just try to remember it's just people, right? So celebrate when it works out and like everything lines up in the universe and it gets accepted. But then also if it doesn't work out, like, be willing to look at your work, but also realize it was just a person reading it on a day.
Right. Exactly.
And I just want to add one more thing to that, because I think I totally agree with what Amelia said, especially from the writer's perspective. And I wasn't sure if in the question in the Q&A or in the question that Kathleen asked, if she was asking from like an editor's perspective. I realized after I'd answered the question that like one thing that we also did at Split Lip Magazine is we kind of defined what our aesthetic was.
Yeah.
And so that was one way to avoid having our own personal bias take over, because we said it's a voicey magazine that really enjoyed kind of pop culture references. And so like there were these certain things that we wanted, certain like marks that we wanted to hit in everything that we published. And so that was really helpful in kind of the way that we made decisions about submissions.
Yeah, and I think that's really good advice, and really good advice to potential submitters is to go in somewhere and read the mission statement. You know, your work might not be a good fit for that. Okay, well, we are about out of time, and I want to tell you about our sponsors. First, I want to thank all the participants: John Thrower, Katerina Stokova, Dorian Hairston, Amelia Martins, and Marianne Chan. And thank you so much for lending your time and your expertise, and for being part of this year's conference. We really appreciate it. And let me tell you a little something about our sponsors. We have some really good sponsors this year. First of all, please be sure to visit the new issue of our journal, Pegasus. The fall 2024 issue is up. It features poems by Sam Ratcliffe, Bill Brymer, Jessica Bentley, and others. The KSPS Chapin Cash and Grand Prix contest winners are in this issue, and they're going to be reading tomorrow afternoon during the conference an interview with Alfonso Zapato and reviews of work by Dorian Hairston, B. Elizabeth Beck, Sandra Ripto, John Secor, and Katerina Stokova. So we're grateful also for these people who have sponsored our conference. Accents Publishing. Thank you, Katerina. Accents is a Kentucky-based press whose mission is to promote brilliant voices and to foster an exchange of literature among different world cultures and languages. And we would like to highlight The Poet's Guide to Publishing, which is Katerina's new book, a guide designed to meet you where you are in your book creation or publication process, and provides a mix of theoretical materials and practical assignments to demystify the process of publishing your work. We're also thankful for the support of Spalding University, the Naslin Mann Graduate School of Writing, and the James Baker Hall Foundation. Additional support from the University Press of Kentucky is currently featuring the recently released Troublesome Rising, an anthology of well-known and emerging Appalachian writers documenting the devastation of the July 2022 flash flood. And that's a beautiful book. I hope you look that up. And finally, our conference is also sponsored by the Red Spotted Newt Books, Arts, and Gifts in Hazard, Kentucky. Thank you, Mandy Fugit Scheffel, who's the owner. Please visit their bookshop page for books by presenters at the Kentucky State Poetry Conference. So I was reading that from a script, and I was not able to put all that information in the chat. But maybe somebody has. Yes, somebody did. Thank you, Suze. I know it was you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So please visit the bookshop, buy books, and support our authors. And we'll see you at the next session at 4:15 with workshop with Savannah Sipple McGraw. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mary Ann. And thank you, everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.